Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hit and Hustle from OurSportsDaily.com. I'm your host, Greg Flammang, and with me, as always, is Jamie Uyeyama, Mr. Jamie University. It is Tuesday, February 3rd. Notre Dame's defensive staff is starting to come together with new expected hires at defensive backs and at linebackers to go with Charlie Partridge at the defensive line. We're going to talk about who those coaches are, what we think of those coaches. Jamie has gotten feedback. He has sent out the bat signal to his people in the industry. They've come back with some good feedback on both of these potential hires. So we're going to talk about that. And then if we've got time, we're going to talk about Notre Dame's kind of staff overall. It's coming together. There might be a couple more departures down the line. I think we've heard Biaggi's name floated a bit. We've seen Lauren Landau's name floated a bit on the strength coach area. So we're going to have to monitor that as things progress here. But we're going to talk about all those things today. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in. If you like what you hear, please hit the like button. Please hit subscribe. Please hit the notification bell so you know whenever it is we are going live. Hopefully, everyone was able to catch my episode with Hannah Hidalgo talking about some of the struggles this year, her taking on those struggles, and the incredible season that she's having. She's having statistically her best season, not just from a point scored standpoint, but also an efficiency standpoint. Talk to her about that in her process. So hopefully you can check that out on the Irish Sports Daily YouTube page. So, and as always, the show is brought to you by ESQ Clothing, founded by Notre Dame alum Ge Wang. He is Chicago's go-to for the best custom suits, shirts, and sport coats. They're known for their next-level craftsmanship using the finest fabrics. ESQ has introduced a 100% Pima cotton t-shirt to go along with its award-winning bamboo dress shirt, available for purchase online. He's got showrooms both downtown Chicago and in Winnetka. Book your custom fitting at esqclothing.com and step into confidence with Chicago's finest. Mention ISD at your appointment or use code ISD at checkout and receive 10% off your entire purchase. That's esqclothing.com. Jamie, I texted you yesterday about Brian Jean-Marie, which is a great name. You said vibes were vibing. So you're fired up about that. Let's start with Aaron Henry, though, the defensive backs coach who was the former DC at Illinois. Let's talk about him and what Notre Dame might be getting from him at the defensive back position.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really exciting hire to me. I think that he's someone that, obviously he was a current defensive coordinator.
Yeah.
So that's, if you're taking somebody who's a current defensive coordinator, that's, not small. I think it's, significant that they're bringing in someone like that. He has that direct connection to Chris Ash, played for him at Wisconsin, was an all Big Ten safety for him there, was hired by Ash at Rutgers to coach on his staff in 2016, and as a coach at like a bunch of other Power 4 programs. And I think the big thing is that when you look at like what he did at Illinois, is what he did to develop those players there. And frankly, there's just like a ton of guys there who specifically, in 2021 and 2022, what he did with those guys that weren't really elite recruits. Well, I mean, they weren't elite recruits, and
like in the top thousands.
Yeah. And, all four guys went in the first, they had four guys go on day one or day two of the NFL draft. Obviously, Devin Witherspoon was a top 5 pick. And you look at what those guys did in terms of production during that time. So Witherspoon, wasn't a full-time starter before Henry got there. Then he was a full-time starter for 2 years, 18 havoc plays in 2021, 19 and a half in 2022, 26 total passes defended in 2 years while they were playing a ton of man coverage. And obviously he was, became a very high pick. He was an All-American. Quan Martin was like a part-time starter for 3 seasons. He had 11 and a half total havoc plays. And then in those 3 seasons, just under 1,400 snaps in his 2 years with Henry, 12 and a half havoc plays in 21, 17 havoc plays in 2022. Sidney Brown was a multi-year starter. I mean, exploded in his 2 years. Became a high pick, 23 and a half havoc plays in 2 years. 12 interceptions total for Wesley Martin Brown in 2022. Kirby Joseph, a guy, is in the NFL as well. He was only had him for 1 year, but he was incredible. He had 5 havoc plays and no interceptions in 3 seasons. His 1 season under Henry, 5 interceptions, 8 havoc plays. Like, made a lot of helped a lot of these guys go to another level there. And I think there's some concern about people talking about, like, oh, well, the defense did this or that during this time, or people talked about how he didn't do a good job of calling the defense. Like, he's not being hired to call the defense, right? He's being hired to coach defensive backs,
right?
And when he's done that, and he's done a pretty darn good job with not the best material, and he's going to walk into a place where he's got really, really good material. So if you're thinking about the kind of guy that has a familiarity, obviously, with Ash and a system, all of that, use that should fit right in that way. Also, ton of experience coaching man coverage corners who played at a really, really high level with a lot of production. You never want to lose someone like Mike Mickens, but if you're going to lose someone like Mike Mickens, this is the kind of guy that you'd want to replace him.
2022, the Illinois defensive backs had 24 interceptions, or excuse me, the defensive backs had 23. The team itself had 24. But 23 is obviously a huge number, right? And he developed, obviously, guys that went on to the NFL with very high picks, playing a lot of man coverage. Like, these are all the things that you want to hear when you're coaching Notre Dame's defensive backs. Like you said, the main criticism that I've seen of him and heard of him is, an Illinois fan. People say Illinois fans are happy he's gone. Yeah, maybe, because maybe they don't like him as a defensive coordinator, And I'd point out, like, this very could have been the deal with Mike Mickens as well. People wanted Mike Mickens to be promoted to defensive coordinator. If he was defensive coordinator and he moved on, he didn't do a very good job, moved on to someone else, people should be fired up if he's coaching the DBs, right? So that's what Aaron Henry is going to be doing for Notre Dame. He's obviously very good at it. He's shown all the things, like all the markers that you would want from a potential successor to Mike Mickens. He's hitting those markers, right? He's developed talent. He's developed the talent that wasn't, top end talent coming out of high school. He's plays the type of coverage his players have produced, 23 interceptions in a season. That's a big deal. That's what you're looking for, right? And look, none of these things are sure things with anything, right? No coach is going to be like that. Obviously he has a very good track record, and that's a very important thing. The same thing with Brian Jean-Marie, who is coming in to coach linebackers, who was at Michigan the prior 2 years. He had just been hired by Georgia Tech. Now he's headed over to Notre Dame. He was one where his name hadn't really come up, and it's like, I didn't know much about him. Reached out to you yesterday. You had put out feelers to people in the industry. Heard a lot of really good things about him and the players that he developed. You do have a piece on irishsportsdaily.com about the players that he has developed over the years. Tell everybody about Brian Jean-Marie and why everyone should be, kind of excited about him.
Yeah, he was someone I put on the original, linebacker list when the job opened up, because he just seemed like, in terms of like a high profile guy who had coached at, multiple stops. He'd been at, Georgia Tech, Louisville, Texas, USF. He was the DC at USF for 3 years, Tennessee, and like you said, Michigan. So anyone who has worked like 20 plus years in the industry and they've worked at those kind of jobs, 10 of those years he was with, Charlie Strong. But if you're going in multiple, big time programs are hiring you, you must be doing something right, obviously. But it's one thing to like look at that, because there's some guys like that work that long, and you ask somebody, or somebody reaches out to you and say, ooh, this guy, he's maybe not as good as his rep or whatever. And I've definitely heard that with some guys who've been candidates for Notre Dame before. And I really didn't know a lot about him. He didn't have like a direct connection to the staff. So he wasn't someone I did a ton of background on before. But yeah, like I said, I reached out to some people, and they were very, very complimentary. And I know I talked to, I was just chatting with our friend John Bryce yesterday too, and he had gotten a lot of really, really positive feedback about him as a coach. And whenever you hear that kind of thing, and then as I'm like diving into, what his players have done during that time, because you can always look at it and there's always, well, double-digit NFL draft picks and this thing. He had 10 players selected first or second team all conference and all that, and that's great. That's all looks good on the bio on whatever. But sometimes it's like, well, this guy was gifted good players, but we want to see. Well, I look at there's a ton of guys who weren't like all conference or didn't get picked, but were super productive college football players. Like obviously Philip Wheeler was a guy who did get drafted at Georgia Tech, and I think Notre Dame fans who were like in that era will remember Philip Wheeler.
That's a deep cut right there.
It is a deep cut, and he was, but he was a stud, an absolute stud. 35 tackles in three tackles for loss in 3 seasons, playing for Ryan Jean Marie at Georgia Tech. Pretty good. Like for an inside linebacker to do that. So I think that is obviously, and that's the thing, because when you see like Kamichael Hall, who's another inside linebacker, 22 tackles for loss over 2 seasons with Brian John Ray. Gary Guyton, 22.5 tackles for loss. Like, and you could say, okay, well, that's like John Tenuta's defense. Well, they're blitzing a lot. They're doing a lot of this. It's like, well, they blitz certainly in Charlie Strong, but not as much, not the same kind of level. Preston Brown, 13 tackles for loss in his final year at Louisville. Dexter Heyman, 16 in 2011 at Louisville. Like, those aren't edge guys either. Those are guys who are playing, inside liner. Peter Jenkins, first team All Big 12 at Texas, 9.5 tackles for loss. Malik Jefferson, 12.5 havoc plays final season when he got coached by BGM. Steve Edmond, 11.5 in a single season. Jordan Hicks, 11 TFLs, 15 total havoc plays. Like, and whatever, go to USF. He had, 4 guys in 3 years at linebacker with double-digit TFLs. And then same thing at Tennessee. They didn't have guys who became NFL guys, but they were super, super productive playmakers in that system. And then you look at like how well his guys played at Michigan, and they played well. Like I always look at, like, sometimes I think it can be a little bit misleading when you see some guys are just strong tacklers no matter what. Like Jack Kaiser, it doesn't matter who was going to coach that guy. He was always going to be like just a strong tackler, right? But when you just see a level consistency of tackling from guys over the years, when you look at, like, say, like those PFF analytics, like the missed tackle percentages, and you see like, oh, he consistently has like top guys there, that stands out, right? That really, really stands out. And obviously he's coaching a lot of like really successful defenses over the years, right? So I think that kind of stuff is always good when you hear more stuff about like, oh yeah, he's a stud, like he's elite, like he's a great coach. Like, that always jumps out too. And especially like, when you don't know much about somebody, and a couple of people I talk to, like I've asked them about some other coaches in the past, and the reviews haven't been as good with some other guys. So I'll say that. And they're not always guys who are pumping sunshine, right? They're not always, painting it a certain way. So when you hear that from guys like that, I think I should give Notre Dame fans reason to be fired up about the hire.
Yeah, I think I was surprised how happy you appeared to be yesterday. Because I didn't expect it. I think my expectation.
I didn't expect it.
Yeah, like it's like, he's good or whatever. Like I heard some good things. Some maybe not so good things. You were like, dude, I'm hearing some stuff that's like, I'm very, very happy. And so I that's obviously a very good thing for the linebacker room. And Notre Dame does have one of the most talented linebacker rooms like in the country. So
absolutely.
Look, when you've been to multiple places, whether you've been at a blue blood schools like Michigan and like Michigan and Tennessee, and then you've been also to USF, and like wherever you've been, your linebackers are producing at a high level. Like that to me tells me like, okay, you can kind of coach all calibers of players, and that's a big deal, right? So it gives me a lot of confidence too. And Marcus Freeman does have a good track record. It does have a good track record. And the other part is like Chris Ash, I don't think this was ever. I don't know if it was considered when he was hired, but there's been a criticism of like, well, because Al Washington leaves, Mike Mickens leaves, Chris Ash stays. Everyone's like, well, how come Ash? Like, is he pushing them out or whatever? Are they unhappy? I don't know about all that. To me, they're going to the NFL. Your staff is going to make moves and go on to the NFL and elevate and things like that. But man, Chris Ash, like he knows a lot of people, like really good candidates, that are very highly coveted, like around college football. I don't know if that was on purpose or if that was just like kind of a happy accident that Marcus Freeman, got him and he had all these connections. But man, like the depth of, I don't want to say talent, the depth of connections that he has been really beneficial to Notre Dame in this specific situation. The way I feel about the staff on defense and the way that it's been constructed, like this is the way that a high profile blue blood top 10 college football program should operate. You have good coaches who then leave for other opportunities in the NFL. And so then you just replace them with all their big time coaches and everything just keeps rolling. It kind of reminds me of that Saban era where it's like, man, he would lose guys and then look who's coming in. Right. And they would just, everything would just turn over and things would continue. Do you kind of feel like that? I don't want to say the staff is in a better situation. I think they continue to be in a good situation.
Yeah, still a strong situation.
Yeah. Is that where you kind of come out there?
Yeah, that's exactly how I come out. I think, they didn't like, it's not like you would say, wow, they upgraded. It's whatever. Like, nah, they had a great staff last year. And I think the staff looks great again. Like they've maintained that. And I think that's one of the things. And I know Mike and I have talked about it a lot on Power Hour and privately too. Like one of the biggest differences between the Marcus Freeman era and the, Brian Kelly era was there were always, probably two guys on each Brian Kelly staff that maybe weren't pulling their weight, whether it was like development, recruiting, whatever, 2 or 3 guys per staff. Right. Yeah. And, when you have a staff of at that time, 9 guys, that's a big deal, right? Like it can hurt you. And that's why they had drawbacks at certain positions where you're like, they can't get over the hump because of this or that. And there just isn't that same kind of level of weakness anymore. And I think that's because, one, I think Marcus Freeman attracts certain guys, but also too, like, I think he prioritizes coaching, like development, guys who are good coaches. And there's one of these things where people can be critical of, a coach. And I'm not saying that people shouldn't be critical of any like hire or person that comes in or whatever. But I also think that Marcus Freeman, we've just seen enough of it now where there's been enough staff turnover. It's going to happen anytime at a college program. Someone's there for 4 years. There's going to be staff turnover. Well, you look at the guys who have come in and replaced them, and just over the course of time, or guys who left early and then were replaced later on. And that's just the level of coaching has just either been at the same level or even gotten better. And so if Marcus Freeman makes the decision to, promote Max Bulla from assistant linebacker coach to the linebacker coach, and that's it, and that's the decision to make him a full-time coach, even though he hadn't been a full-time coach at the time. I think at that time, maybe some people questioned it a little bit, even though there was like, obviously good reviews about what Bulla had done at Notre Dame to that point. But there's always like a question. Whoa, what about recruiting? What about this? What about whatever, right? And he's never done this before. Now, I think whether it was pulling somebody from another program or internally bumping someone up, you'd have to give Marcus Freeman the benefit of the doubt, saying, I think he knows what he's doing. And not to say that it's going to be all, no one's going to bat 1,000, but it's pretty close. He's batted, like his batting average is pretty amazing. And I'd say that too. Like, and that is the one thing with Nick Saban, you'd say over the years, it's probably what separated him from so many others. It was like, because you look at Dabo Swinney's a perfect example. as his staff started to deteriorate and go to other places or retired or whatever and moved on, things have just gone downhill and it's just chipped away. And he's never quite been able, whether it was hiring a high profile hire like Garrett Riley or promoting somebody from within that you think, he's never seemed to get it right. And that has probably been their biggest downfall, because they still have talent. They recruit better actually now in terms of rankings and all that than they did, when they were winning national championships. But it doesn't matter if you're not getting the right coaches and you're not in the staff doesn't fit and all that kind of the other things around it. And I think that's been the kind of problem is Dabo is just why he hasn't been able to maintain it to that level. And Saban, the reason why 17 years, you do it at that's such a high level for that long, you have to replace guys. And I think, Marcus Freeman, that's why you kind of feel confident that they already have talent. So it's easy to come in and coach good talent, but you also feel like, he recognizes coaching talent and they're going to be in good shape.
Yeah. We got a question here. Upgrade at D-line, upgrade at linebacker, push slight downgrade at DB. And this kind of leads into the point that I want to make. We're looking at them in a vacuum, right? You could make a case that trading Bulla for Partridge is an upgrade just because Partridge is so kind of well regarded, especially by you and at the position, right? And you can make a case for just in a vacuum, Washington being replaced by Jean-Marie is an upgrade. You can make the case in a vacuum. And you could also make the case in a vacuum, like maybe Aaron Henry isn't as good as Mickens. So I think it's fair comment. My concern here is now every position group on the defense is being coached by someone else. They all have new coaches, and that doesn't happen in a vacuum, and it's in totality, and they all have to work together. And that is the variable that we don't know, and we don't know how that's going to work. It is the nature of what Notre Dame has to do. I mean, unless they had promoted from within, right? And they had promoted someone else to take the job. But if they were going outside of the staff, the current staff, it was going to be a new person. And so that is my question is, are all these guys going to gel with the new voice that's in the room, especially when Chris Ash has only been there for a year, right?
Yeah.
And my impression was the players leaned very heavily on their position coaches, at least in the beginning of the year with Chris Ash.
When things weren't going great,
yeah. When transitioning from from Golden to Ash, right? So Ash has only been there for a year. It's not I don't think he was as connected to the defensive players as Al Golden was. And now all those voices are gone from, their position groups. That's a variable that has to be worked out that we don't really know about.
Yeah. And I would say that if you looked at it where it was last year, where they had that weird spring where it's not everyone is practicing and that, I think that would have been just horrendous. It would have been the worst possible situation to have a bunch of new coaches and then you didn't get to actually coach most of the guys during spring. Now they're going to get a chance to coach those guys during spring. Yeah. As was pointed out too, that, Henry, a coach with Ash, same thing with Partridge, right? So that part of it, I think is going to be easy. And then also too, the fact that Brian Jean-Marie is a guy who is coached under all these different systems and different coaches and fit in. So you don't worry about that as much as you would if it was all, guys that it was it's a mishmash of guys just reaching.
Yeah.
And I think that was part of one of the things with Charlie Weiss, where he brought in guys there, but it was just a grab bag of coaches, and it turned out to be not good. It wasn't a good combination of people. And I don't think that was probably the thing that he was probably worst at was, he's a great play caller, Charlie Weiss, not really great at forming a staff. And he was also in a really hard position at that time, but that is one of those things that doesn't really get evaluated when they're hiring a coach, but like, how's the person going to do it? Especially with someone like Marcus Freeman, who's like hadn't done it before. You're looking at it, and I think too, like someone pointed about Chancey Stuckey about like, well, that was the kind of one kind of miss, right? Because obviously he's the only one who got fired, so you could say, yeah, that was a miss. Well, I think that was probably a lesson because that was Tommy Rees's hire, and and I think one of the things was, well, if Marcus Freeman could have a do-over, he would have said, well, there's just no way. I gotta pick this guy. This is the right guy that we got to make sure we can be on the same page, but I got to be I got to be the one who makes that choice. And I think there hasn't been any, even though they've gone guys that like I said, have ash ties. I think these are guys obviously that Marcus Freeman has signed off on and that he feels confident in. And I think that matters. It does matter.
It's something we kind of take for granted too. Is a couple years ago with, there was the fiasco at, offensive coordinator with Andy Ludwig and Colin Klein, and then ended up being Jared Parker. Like, losing Mike Mickens, like that's a big deal. Losing Al Washington's a big deal. And it ends up Max Bola as well. Like, I think we kind of take for granted, like the way that this all went about. Nothing dragged on. There was no weirdness. Well, I mean, so far, knock on wood, I guess. There's no weirdness with, this guy's he's at the hockey game or whatever, like stuff like that. And I just think, and it kind of goes to the kind of the whole offseason, going back to like the recruiting class, no decommitments, the portal class, which ended up being, very strong, one that everyone's happy with, even though the start wasn't exactly, that was probably the closest to chaos we saw, kind of this whole offseason was the start of the portal class. And then that like 3-week stretch when it wasn't clear if Marcus Freeman was going to be the coach. But then after that, you sign the portal class and then you got to replace these coaches and they end up doing it. Like, I just think that speaks a lot to the organization that Notre Dame is right now, because there were a lot of ways for this offseason to go very poorly. And it kind of didn't, and that, that has nothing to do with the fact that the committee and the playoffs and everything in the bowl game, like that was kind of aside from everything else. But the offseason could have gone very much in the wrong direction for Notre Dame this year. And I don't think it did. And I think they ended up in a really good spot. Right. And that's kind of where I'm at. Are you in the same boat there?
Yeah, I would say, like, I think the swiftness of how they made these hires too.
Yeah.
I think it could have been, if it drags into like late February, that's bad. Like that's because then you're just asking that guy to come in right now, not only for recruiting purposes, because that is obviously important, but just establishing, like, guys have to get in the building and they have to, like, you're setting like the defense and everything you're going to do and learning the personnel. Also, not just learning the personnel and what guys can and can't do and watching film of your own team and your own players, but like getting to know those guys and actually forming a relationship with them. If you're doing that and you have like 2 weeks before spring ball, it's a tough ask, right? That's a really, really tough ask. And that's also too, just one of those things, like, it's unfortunate that like, they even have to make these hires at this time, but it is a weird year because there were so many open jobs in the NFL. Like almost a third of the league had, a head coach opening. And whenever there's that, there's going to be so much turnover. And so it's not just that guys are going to the NFL now from college more than ever. That's probably a thing, but it's also a thing that these guys, there are more opportunities now because all these jobs opened up, right? And because some of these guys have connections, like recent connections, they coached in college football. So that's another part of it too. But I think it could have been, anytime you're turning over this many guys, and especially when you say you go from your defensive line coach is going to be your linebacker coach, and then that guy leaves, that could be potentially disastrous.
Yeah.
Like, and I think considering like they absolutely averted disaster and came out of it pretty good.
Yeah, it does seem like the staff is going to be fairly set with some caveats. Marty Biagi's been linked to some NFL jobs recently, so we're gonna have to monitor that situation. Lauren Landau has also been linked to some jobs. I think John Bryce, our friend John Bryce, had brought that up as well. He has a relationship with Clint Kubiak going back to the Broncos. Where is Clint Kubiak going again?
Raiders.
The Raiders. Okay, so he has a relationship there. He might bring him over. How big a deal would that be to you at this point? Right? Maybe not necessarily Lauren Landau in a vacuum, but just the fact that you also add into the fact that Notre Dame's off-season program is kind of just now starting up, and you want that in place, right? This is a very important time for every program right now. They're all getting started in that. So from a timing perspective, how big a deal would it be to you if Lauren Landau was to leave the program?
I think that is actually would be a lot worse timing just because of like what you said, right? Like it would be like a coach leaving during the season, right? This is his season, right? Basically.
Yeah. Good point.
So at the same time, I think that it would just be tough because whoever you brought in, it's like you're bringing somebody in, they're not going to change everything that's already in place because there's not enough time to change all this stuff in place. You kind of have to roll with Landau's program, and obviously the assistants, you would assume that most of them would still be in place and they would kind of oversee that program during that time. But it's also too a lesson where you should always have, you got to have multiple people in place that are like, you can't just have one guy. This guy's in charge of all of this, because if he goes and then it just like crumbles, you're in a bad spot. Right. So, yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see, like, I mean, if he left, because I don't know if there would be like an obvious choice for someone to come in. Although I will say that maybe Dave Ballou, who was another guy who was a contender for the job but stayed at Alabama. They gave him a big raise. He stayed there after, he stayed with Kalen DeBoer. DeBoer had worked in Indiana before, so they had a relationship. But, things aren't going great in Alabama. Not the same. He was a previously assistant at Notre Dame. Maybe he wants to go to, because it does seem like Kalen DeBoer, I mean, he'll get hired somebody else if they doesn't go well at Alabama this year. He still will. He's got enough long of a track record. Well, if Marcus Freeman isn't at Notre Dame, if he gets hired somewhere else, it's going to be in the NFL. So he might bring him along there. It's like you would rather attach yourself to Marcus Freeman. Right. So, and whatever. They're just speculating, whatever. Nothing is done with Lando or anything. I'm just saying that is somebody that could be a possibility. But to be honest, there's so few people that actually know like who the good, like, man, this guy's the best strength and conditioning guy. And I know this too from my cousin being in the industry for, decades and stuff too.
Yeah.
It's like, sometimes people you think are the greatest guys aren't the best guys. And some guys come out of nowhere, and then some assistant comes up and they are, I mean, Dave Ballou was IMG Academy. And then all of a sudden he's 2 years later, he's Alabama's guy. Right. So it's how it happens.
I do think it's a situation where he's got to be, since John, I think John's been talking about this for a couple of weeks. So if he did leave, you can't be like, oh, I'm surprised. Like, I do think he has to have someone kind of lined up, and this has to happen quickly. Cause as you said, for the strength coach, it is in season. Like if your head coach leaves, like for example, like, Lane Kiffin leaves, right? Like you do have to have a solution, because they got to get to work. Like all the players have off-season workouts and everything. Like they do need to get that put in place. So I would hope that situation, should Lauren Landau leave, would be figured out very, very quickly. I think that process would have to go quick. With Marty Biagi as well. Like I personally am a big fan of Marty Biagi. I like Notre Dame special teams.
Yeah. Done a
I
good job.
think, I think Notre Dame's that position would be very highly coveted because it means a lot to Marcus Freeman, and he puts a lot of emphasis on it. And so that's the kind of place that's like, hey, if I'm going to go be a special teams coach, I want to go here. You know, I mean, look at what happened. Like Brian Mason, right? If he went on to the NFL, if Marty Biaggi leaves, he's going on to the NFL, right? That's exactly what you want if you're going to be a special teams coach. So that's something to monitor as we go through the offseason here. Let's talk about the staff overall, Jamie, because I think the offense has seen like basically no change at all, actually, since the season ended. So what is your feeling on just kind of, let's talk about the offensive staff here and where things are with the staff overall as well, and just kind of look at where things, like, I personally think, like, if I was thinking, does Notre Dame need new blood in this situation, I would look at Gino Guidugli, not specifically because of anything that he's done wrong per se. I just think it's been a little bit, and maybe a new voice would be like, I mean, I feel like that's a situation that could elevate. I think Ge Wang is kind of A1 as far as running backs coaches go. He can hang out. I'm interested to get your thoughts on Mike Brown. I think he's had kind of a glow up recently, given the recruiting and the way that Malachi Fields is kind of performing at the Senior Bowl. Not that he developed him, but he certainly didn't hamper his development while he was at Notre Dame. So just want to get your thoughts on that, on the offensive staff as well.
Well, I think overall they got a really strong offensive staff. Obviously, Mike Denbrock.
They certainly had a very good year.
Yeah, they had a great year, right? They had a great year.
Yeah.
It was arguably the best offense, and by metrics, you could say it was the best offense that Notre Dame has had in 15 years or whatever, right? So, it's tough to complain about that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And also too, like, even with Gino Guidugli, like, you could say, well, is he kind of stuck there because I'm sure he wants to be, at one time he was a coordinator. I'm sure he wants to call plays somewhere. I'm sure that's something that he wants to do. So I don't know what his, future situation is going to be, or if he's going to get that opportunity or whatnot. But you can't say, like, well, CJ Carr just had, a great first year, and it's tough to kind of paint it as in a way that he should be like, wow, they should try to get somebody to get better there, when it's like, oh, he's did a pretty good job. Riley Leonard obviously did a really good job, with him. And
I think just on that point, like, CJ Carr had a very good year in the ways that a coach would have an effect over, like his preparation and his ability to make checks and his ability to read defenses and stuff like that is stuff you're being coached on. So it's not just him being like, it's not hard to be Caleb Williams quarterback coach. You know what I mean? But like for CJ Carr, like, he's got to make the right reads and stuff. And he was doing that. So to the point, those are stuff that would show up from a coaching perspective.
Yeah. And I think too, like, if you look at, like, obviously Sider was already highly thought of, and you'd say year one went pretty darn well with his guys there. You feel, great about that. And I would say Mike Brown, I think one of the things in his first season, I think a lot of the stuff of, like, you could look at the lack of production at the receiver had more to do with, like, Jordan Faison's injury, the talent there, that overall, like, so Bo Collins, his problems there of, like, not catching the ball is, like, he does the exact same thing he had at Clemson his whole career. That's That's who Bo Collins is as a player, right? And so I think there's a lot of the receiver stuff is like, well, how good is the material? And I think this is, like, obviously a huge year for Mike Brown and just the receivers in general, because there's a lot of young guys that I think if they do elevate and really take that next step, that could be really, really exciting for Notre Dame. But I think overall he's done a pretty good job. And then, last year obviously was, like, the best recruiting year Notre Dame has had at the position in quite some time too. So, and he deserves, certainly some of the credit for that too. And, one of these things with, like, Mike Denbrock, you could say like not just him as an offensive coordinator, but as like the tight ends coach. Whenever whether he's coaching receivers, whether he's coaching tight ends, wherever he's coaching at Notre Dame, he's done a good job of it. He's obviously a very good football coach. And then I think too, like I know we wanted to talk a little bit about Joe Rudolph. Like I think Joe Rudolph has done a really good job. Like I think he has done a really good job overall. I think some of the criticism of him is unfair. I do understand, like we always have Raymond Horton, who's always in the chat here. He's not in here today, but he's typically in here complaining about Joe Rudolph.
If he's complaining, he's complaining about Joe Rudolph.
Yes. Yeah, I don't want to paint him as a guy who's like super negative.
He is not. He's not.
And I totally appreciate him.
Yeah.
Actually, I actually really appreciate his always involvement.
He has a strong opinion about the O-line coach. And let me ask you this on Joe Rudolph. What do you think is the most fair critique of him?
I would say if you're going to look at it like, and just my opinion is that I think that he takes, if I was going to just look at recruiting wise, and he has obviously a big say in who they get there, right? A huge say, like the most important say.
He probably, and not just that, the most important because it's the least understood.
Yes. And I do think he does a really good job overall. Like, because if you think about someone like Will Black and Matty Augustine, and like he was on Will Black before Will Black was blowing up, like, you know, and Matty Augustine, who didn't really blow up in terms of his ranking. But now that Will Black has been a year on campus, these people are about to look stupid with their rankings of him, you know, like he's going to be a really good player at Notre Dame if he stays healthy. Right. But I think too, if you're looking at some of the stuff with like some of the interior guys, you could say it's like, well, are all these guys like, they're all like a certain type. They do remind me of, in fact, a lot of Wisconsin guys, like who he would get there.
Yeah.
Then again, a lot of those guys ended up becoming NFL players. So I'm kind of waiting and see with some of these guys, but it's like, if you look at like, well, it's almost just nitpicky to be it, because it's like, well, they got like Gerby Lambert, and who was obviously like in that class was one of the top guys. Will Black, one of the top guys. This class, McKeo is one of the top guys. Like, you know, like that's not someone everyone's doing. And if you look at, say, like Anthony Knapp, who, I mean, I certainly liked him as a recruit. I know there were other people in the beat who didn't like him and thought it was a reach. And there's just people in general who were like, this guy, you know, he didn't have the offer list. He didn't have this. It was like, man, that was an awesome evaluation by Joe Rudolph, like that. And that was someone that he watched at Virginia Tech and really liked, and that thing. Right. And I think that is one of these things where it's like, you could say he hasn't had the he stand because, you know, you can't, even though he did coach Joe Alt and Blake Fisher, it's like he came in when those guys were there already. So you can't really say those are his guys. And he hasn't really had his guys be those high picks yet. And, you know, we'll see if that's the case, but it's like, well, let's see where Gerby Lambert is in a couple years, where Will Black is. And the fact that Charles Jagusaw is supposed to be, because that's another one of his, that's a Rudolph guy. He would be this guy who's probably going to be like, if he would have played this past
narrative wise, it's very unfortunate for Joe Rudolph that he keeps getting hurt.
Totally. Because he's probably a guy would have been a projected first round pick if he, like, for the next year, if he would have played this year. Like, that's something that would have probably happened. And he has zero control over that. Right. Like, and that's, so I think some of that stuff's unfair. Josh Miller saying he has his guys and he doesn't like it. I don't know what that means. Do you know what that means?
I think it means that, like, so I think with Anthony Knapp, it's like specifically is that the idea is he likes him at left tackle and he's going to be the left tackle. And I think that a lot of people feel like Anthony Knapp should not be the left tackle. It should be like Gerby. Like I think a lot of people wanted Gerby at left tackle. I don't know, and I'm not speaking for Josh here. I don't know. Now I'm projecting other people, what things that I hear onto this conversation.
I see actually below when he says like Will Black, but Will Black can move into guard, but Knapp.
Right. Like why can't Anthony Knapp be the one to play guard? Why is it that he's just like, but the perception is Anthony Knapp is his guy. So therefore he's the left tackle. We got to move Will Black. Like the other people have to move around Anthony Knapp. I think is the criticism or what his guys. Like I think people see Anthony Knapp as his guy.
I mean, Gerby Lambert is also his guy. And I think Gerby Lambert is going to be the starting right tackle for Notre Dame this year, but he moved him inside to guard because that's what they needed. Like I think, and the reason why Will Black worked at guard, which is why it's not a fair comparison that Josh is making, in my opinion, because Will Black moved there because they're like, well, if we need somebody, he's got a clear path to play early. Like he got reps with the ones in camp at left guard, right? Or at right guard, because they were like looking at the position. They're like, we got to make sure we get the right guy there. And that's why he was working there, right? Like, it's not to say that Will Black won't be, Will Black might be the left tackle, in 2027 or whatever. I don't know, right? Like, Will Black could be the right tackle this year, for all we know. We don't know yet. So I think Anthony Knapp it's the criticism of Anthony Knapp has been totally unfair. He was really, really good last year. Like, yeah, he didn't have
it poisoned. He got whipped against Miami and it poisoned the well. The same thing with Emil Wagner. Like that, I think that soured everybody, not just on those players, but on like Joe Rudolph as well. I mean, let's be real. Like that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
So I think that's what it is.
And it's like we were talking about before the podcast. Well, what about the previous year when those guys just like, well, these guys aren't good in big games? Like they're pretty good the previous year in all these big games. So it's like they just got whipped that day. And by the way, those guys whipped everybody. Like everybody. Like nobody blocked Ruben Bain and Mesmer all year.
They kicked the crap out of Indiana's O-line. They just did.
They kicked the crap out of Ohio State's O-line. Yeah. They kicked the crap, like everybody's O-line. Didn't matter. You got a first round pick, boom. I don't care. People were raving about Carter Smith, the left tackle for Indiana. Like he was like, believe me, that guy probably thought, hey, if I leave, I'm gonna be a first round pick. Then he got whooped. And then he's like, well, I'm coming back to school. Like that's the kind of thing that happened, right? Like, so I think that kind of stuff was like totally unfair. And also too, if you go back and look at like, say, the next game against Texas A&M, those guys played pretty well.
They were much better, miles better. I mean, it was, and Texas A&M had a good defense, I mean, with Cassius Howell and everything. I think, and the point that I was making before the pod, like, it's funny how Notre Dame's O-line, like when they play, but you play the top teams like Miami and you get destroyed, right? And they should be able to beat them up, right? Like Notre Dame should be able to be dominant against even the best lines like Miami's, right? Okay. If that's the ask, then that's fine. But no one ever says like, okay, in 24 to end the year, right? Like Notre Dame's secondary at times against USC got absolutely cooked. I mean, they were getting cooked at times against USC. And everyone imparts that on, it was Christian Gray. It's like, yeah, but that it's still Mike Mickens secondary. Like, and that's the thing. This is not Mike Mickens shade at all, but I think that people understand when it's a receiving core that it's like, well, I mean, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Like when it's Ohio State in the title game and it's Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith, who are the wide receiver equivalent of Ruben Bain and Akeem Messidor. When it's that, and then they're converting and Notre Dame can't get a stop ever, except for when they force a fumble on a Drake Bowen play where they're running down the field for 30 yards, by the way. And they get a stop when Will Howard throws it on a wide open Jeremiah Smith. He misses him, right? The secondary is getting cooked all over the field.
Yeah.
But people say, well, that's the best. Those are the two best wide receivers. And what are you going to do? Like, but no one ever makes that point when it's the D line. Like when you play great D line, it's going to be a struggle. Like when they played Pitt, Pitt, and it's like that game when you're down linemen and you have a new center and everything. And that center, by the way, is in this huge boot. And it's like, yeah, it's going to be difficult, but you still rip off the runs that you need. So like, I just think that people, they want a line where it's like, I don't care if there's 11 in the box, we're running ISO and we're running for 9 yards of carry. I just think people need to like give the same grace to the O-line as you would give to, Notre Dame's secondary in a similar type of matchup is what I would say.
Well, and I would also say, if you're going to say, because the look at the linebackers at the beginning of last year.
Yes.
And even though, I mean, people had obviously respected Max Bulla and him as a coach and the job he's done with the linebackers, but it wasn't like, man, Max Bullock sucks. He sucks. He's doing the linebackers are playing bad. He's doing a terrible job. It's like, people put the blame on Ash, which I think was probably closer to reality, but that's how it was. Instead of just doing it, it's like there's a lot of picking and choosing. And even so, Josh Miller, when you're talking about right, Knapp is good, but he's not an NFL tackle. So when Rudolph says Jags is okay at tackle, but could be an elite NFL guard, why move Jags inside instead of Knapp? Well, maybe Knapp can't be as good of a guard as Charles Jagusa. Maybe that's the reason. Like, so that seems to me like pretty logical that would be a reason. And also too, I don't know that I think Anthony Knapp might be a tackle in the NFL. Like he might. Like Will Campbell has a lot shorter arms than Anthony Knapp. And he was a top 5 pick. So, and I'm not saying that he's going to be a top 5 pick or anything like that, but I'm saying it's not at 100% that Anthony Knapp is not going to be a tackle, because he's not the same. He is different than Robert Hainsey and some of these other guys, whatever, right? Like, so, or just like, because Zach Martin was a better guard in the NFL. He's like, it's a Hall of Famer, one of the best guards ever. He still was an elite left tackle, right? Like, so, and I'm not saying that Knapp is at that level, but he's pretty darn good. Like I wouldn't be shocked if Anthony Knapp was an All-American this year. I wouldn't be shocked. Like I would not be. I'm not predicting it, but I think he's going to be one of the better left tackles in the country. I do think that's possible because of how, one, it's just like a natural progression of guys who get better. The guy's played 2 full years at left tackle and gone better and better. And I think he's going to be a better version of the player he was last year. So I just don't understand why there's just like this thing for just, it's like people picking on him more than even Rudolph, really. And I just don't think it's fair.
Yeah. And I think when, like for me, the national title game was like a big, I was very interested to see like how is Indiana's O-line going to perform in this game? Because it was like they were pretty dominant against Oregon. And they were pretty, I don't want to say dominant, but they handled Oregon pretty good.
Yes. And
then they handled Ohio State a little bit, not as good, but they did well enough, right? Like I think they, when they played Ohio State, they scored 13 points. It's not like they were running up and down the field either, but it's like they played well. I wanted to see, because that was the one like for like opponent that Notre Dame and Indiana were going to play. Indiana had a worse pressure rate allowed. They actually had worse yards per carry allowed. And people was like, well, that's sack adjusted. Well, they're giving up more sacks too. That's the other part. And so like that, and this was when Indiana had full knowledge of what Miami was. And they had an entire year of seeing these two guys, which Notre Dame didn't have the benefit of.
No.
They scored 20 offensive points. Notre Dame scored 24. They got the benefit of the punt block for a touchdown, and they got the benefit of Miami's missed field goal that Notre Dame did not get. So we're talking about 10 points that didn't come from the offense that are literally the difference. They won by 7 instead of losing by 3. Like, that is the 10-point difference that we're looking at there. So to me, it was not as if they were so much better. Like, there was the whole Pat Coogan thing, and if only they had Pat Coogan. Pat Coogan was getting
handled.
He was getting handled in that game, And so it is what it is. And Indiana won the game because they made the plays defensively that Notre Dame did not make. And so they're national champions, and all credit to them, right? What my point is like, to me, it was enlightening of the fact that, look, Notre Dame really struggled in one game last year, and it was against the defense that Notre Dame's O-line did not struggle, but Notre Dame's O-line struggled against one team all year, and it was the team that everybody struggled in. They killed Ohio State, They killed Texas A&M's O-line, which was one of the best O-lines in the country. 3 points for Texas A&M at home. So, I don't want to say I give them a pass. I'm just saying I understand you gave them 24 points, and on the road in the first game, I just think that performance aged better as the season went on. It's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, I think that's exactly where I'm at too. And I would say too that you look at why Miami got as far as they did. Obviously they spent a ton of money on Carson Beck as a quarterback, and overall he played well. He played well over the course of the year. He wasn't like a Heisman guy. He wasn't unbelievable. He played well. Well, the reason they got as far as they did was because of their offensive and defensive lines. Yeah. That's why. And I think if you looked and you could say in that first game, their O-line and their D-line, although it was a lot closer, I think, with the O-line and D-line for their offensive line versus Notre Dame's D-line in that game. But the gap between their D-line and Notre Dame's O-line was like the biggest difference in the game. Turnovers and all that too. Yeah, sure. But and the biggest difference in every game really for them, they had such a huge edge, right? So, and I think that's why, you want to get, if you get that level of dominance, it's just like, why did the New York Giants beat undefeated, going for 19-0, the New England Patriots? Their D-line whooped them.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's as simple as that.
Yep. So it is what it is, but I think, at the ballpark figure, I think we're very happy with Notre Dame staff, and I think everyone should be very happy with Notre Dame's football team. Like, I think they don't have an obvious weakness, and they also don't have an obvious weakness on the staff. So that makes for, a very exciting season. So I think we can end it there. Thank you everyone for tuning in. If you like what you heard, hit that like, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell. So whenever it is we are going live, we'll be back on Thursday with more Notre Dame football talk. See if there's any more news to discuss. And if not, then we'll find something to talk about, because we can always find something to talk about with Notre Dame football. So we will talk to you on Thursday. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Keep hitting and hustling.